Okay. And so we're greeted with a picture of a cat. Ladies and gentlemen, variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, an Elder Scrolls podcast. A casual Elder Scrolls podcast. So casual, I still can't get this fucking intro right. Today we're talking about the Thalmor. We're talking about everybody's favorite, possibly leather-robed elf Nazis. Oh crap! We're only less than a minute into the cast, and I already said the Nazi word. Wow, I shouldn't have taken that bet.
Goodwin's law says you lose.
Yeah. Anyway, my name's Rotten Deadite. With me today are
Corey. I have other names, but I'm using this one.
I'm Andrew, also known as the White Guar and Soviet Rod Infidel elsewhere.
I am James, also known as Aramithius.
It's Jonathan, known as Selthus.
Hi, I'm Michael. You may know me as Scourgicus or Moon Sugar Leader, and this is Addy.
So, I think we should probably do what we usually try to do with these casts, which is start at the beginning with a brief history of today's subject. And it's probably, we can the Thalmor did nothing wrong cast over. Thank you. Great. I would say we're already on board. That's my message entirely. We don't exactly have an exact date, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think I am, of when the Thalmor were established as an organization, but we do know that they are first mentioned in the context of the first Dominion, the first Aldmeri Dominion, sometime in at least the early Second Era, as being tasked with the responsibility of
Governing Valenwood.
Yeah, of what now? Say again?
The Thalmor, so the Aldmeri Dominion, the first Aldmeri Dominion, had a hegemony over parts of Valenwood, and those that ruled Valenwood were called the Thalmor. And
Right.
Tiber Septim done did away with that.
Yeah, and so the Thalmor were basically tasked with retaining or encouraging the retainment of Aldmeri culture, which is I'm not entirely sure where that was mentioned, but the very first thing that comes to mind when somebody says retaining culture is, and this is because I grew up in New Orleans, the Klan, who claim that their primary mission is to retain Southern white people culture, which, as everybody knows, is just fucking great. And I'm going to try my best to not politicize this cast, but it is extremely easy for me to get highly, highly triggered when the Klan are mentioned. So hopefully that'll be the last time I bring them up. Retaining culture is a very vague, conveniently vague term in politics. It allows a person to, it allows an organization to do basically anything they want in the name of retaining culture. But it does, and this is probably key to the psychology of the Thalmor, it does cast them into a political mindset that one might call conservative. It resists change. It encourages people to think fondly of the good old days, and it allows it allows people the indulgence of nostalgia, as I like to call it. This is a big deal to the Altmer in particular, because a lot of very hardline Altmer are. Sure, Doc, that's actually a really good definition. The Thalmor are a sub-governmental organization tasked to safeguard Aldmeri culture, traditions, and religion. And they've lasted pretty much, off and on throughout all three dominions, all three versions of, all three incarnations, I guess, of the Aldmeri Dominion. Some people have said that the Thalmor are a religious organization. But that's probably a valid way of interpreting them. But on paper, at the very least, it sounds as though the Thalmor were originally intended to be a cultural organization.
Well, you see, to say that the Thalmor are not religious would be wrong, because religion in Altmer society is culture. So they literally believe themselves to be the remnants of fallen gods. Their entire culture revolves around being actually worshiping a static force and selective nostalgia. From what we can glee from the PGEs and current lore coming out of ESO is that the Somerset Isles are really based what we would think of as an extreme imperial isolationist China or Japan, and the way, in the context of men were not allowed to set foot on the Isles, and if they did, as far as they got were Ariadon. So they did not set foot on the largest isle, which I call Alanor.
Mm-hmm.
So the Thalmor. So if, let's say, the Alessians, when I say Alessians, I mean practitioners of the imperial cult. If the imperial city is the city of 1,000 cults, the Aldmeri Isles are the society of a dogmatic single way of doing things.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of summarizing it. It's a single organization, a single religious organization that is focused on propagating its religious its politic and its culture, and kind of running out all of the all possible competitions. So now it should be mentioned for those of you who are watching this, in the future, that this has come out before the Somerset Isles expansion. So there's probably a lot of lore that we're not, that we don't get right now.
Yeah. All of the lore we're going over is based off of old in-game lore and many awesome outside writings by various authors.
Yeah. And that's and so it's very important to remember that there could be a lot of lore that we're going to get in Somerset Isles that outright contradicts. In fact, I'm hoping there's going to be a lot of lore that we get in the Somerset Isles expansion for ESO that contradicts what we say, because that shit is interesting. And it's always nice to learn new and different things. But we're going to end up with one of the reasons why I think the timing of this cast is fortuitous is because, if nothing else, hopefully we'll be able to help encourage some of the hype towards the Somerset Isles expansion, which we're all looking forward to.
Definitely.
And if we did it after the expansion, I kind of get the impression that we would spend a lot of our time just regurgitating what was already happening in the expansion.
Yeah, I would just be analyzing which
we might do. I mean, maybe there's going to be something really amazing that we just need to talk about. So I'm not ruling that out.
We can probably revisit the topic with the information we see in Somerset. So
yeah, that's a really good idea. So we don't. Having said that, the Thalmor are furthering Aldmeri culture, or working to further Aldmeri culture, is probably selling them short as far as it's definitely selling them short as far as the overall plot of the Elder Scrolls universe, which we kind of need to get out of the way right now, which is that the Thalmor win, yay! And in order to talk about that, we're going to have to talk about what the tinfoil hat theory is on the actual goal of the Thalmor, which is to remove the mythic of mankind, of mortality, out of Mundus, and return the Aldmeri back to their true nature as
themselves.
Adra, basically.
I'm a little skeptical there, if I can just be a dissenting voice.
Please do.
As I said, the main source for that we have for that, the Kirkbride post calls it an Aldmeri commentary on Talos. It doesn't say it's a Thalmor commentary. It could just be an elf sitting somewhere in his ivory tower thinking, "Oh, we need to correct this," and not an official government stance. And we then have the novels, which have the claim they want to establish a new mirific era. Is the quote that gets thrown out there, which implies just Mirish rule over Tamriel, possibly more magical, maybe, but I don't know how far we can extend that. Although, if the Thalmor could bring back magic, or bring back more magic, that's kind of interesting in itself.
Well, that's assuming that magic itself has declined, which I would say it almost certainly has not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I just recently got my chimneys in a rustle because I found an old quote from Todd Howard that said that if magic disappeared from the Elder Scrolls universe, nobody would notice.
Wow.
And I don't know when he made that quote. I don't know what it was in reference to. I don't even know if it was an actual quote and somebody just made that shit up. But if the idea of I have a really hard time buying into the idea of an Elder Scrolls universe without magic. If for no other reason than the overwhelming amount of evidence that supports the idea that the Elder Scrolls universe can't exist without magic, that it is literally magic in just many different forms.
Even if there wasn't just Magicka-based magic, I mean, there's still total magic, which is the fabric of the universe. So, I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
Which actually is an interesting point, Andrew. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that statement as saying that what he was saying is that if the practice of magic disappeared, nobody would notice.
Yeah, I mean, science is inextricably magic in this universe. There is no separation between the two.
Right.
To be a scientist is to be a magician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about is that it could also be a comment about people's access to magic. In the second era, there was all kinds of shenanigans going on. Empire across the stars, yada yada, void ships. We'll talk about that.
Manonauts.
Right? Manonauts. Love those guys. But none of that really. I mean, you do still have some planar traversal, but that's usually through portals with sigil stones and stuff like that. So it could be a comment about that at least the higher orders of magic will be less available because not as much of that stuff is happening. Like in ESO, I mean, you're going to different Daedric realms all the time. And
well, I think that has something to do with the new covenant that Martin established for Tamriel through his sacrifice.
Well, I mean, even in ESO, like, isn't it the common consensus that the way shrines are actually a Thalmeri type of magic, which, I mean, that's I think is like the gazebo things, right?
Ooh.
Is that I've heard that before.
I have not heard that.
That's an interesting idea.
I've often wondered about that.
Yeah.
Although, wouldn't that then limit them to limit those way shrines to more locations to further away than they actually are? Because they're throughout the map, if I'm right.
Oh,
Well,
they're all over the place.
Yeah, you could theoretically say that the way shrines are Aldmeri in origin, but they were actually created by wandering Elnathay.
Probably.
Or old Elnathay. But
yeah, which depending on how strict a definition you take of the Elnathay. How do we get onto this subject? So. So here's the thing about the Elder Scrolls Ramblecast.
Hey. So I think we've established who the Thalmor are pretty well. You know, they're a historic organization designed to,
yeah,
safeguard.
And that arguably, their goal is to remove the mythic of man from the Arbus, and therefore bring their their people back to a magical status, or certainly just remove the curse of mortality from people.
So
But-
I want, indeed, I want to ask you guys a question. So the Thalmor, the proto-Thalmor are actually referenced in Oblivion. They will talk about how there are elves rioting or protesting in the Isles in the prologue of Oblivion.
Mm-hmm.
So this obviously means, or at least to me, that the Thalmor at least started during the collapse of the Crystal-like Law. However, the Aldmeri Dominion, since its inception, has gone against traditional Aldmeri values in the way that they are worldly. They are taking interest strategically in the world, not just by reuniting the Murish peoples,
Mm-hmm.
but by, they're establishing hegemony over Tamriel. So I want to ask if anyone knows who the Beautiful are, and if you guys even can recall those.
I've heard the term before.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
Beautiful were a bunch of radical, basically terrorists that were rioting against traditional Aldmeri values. Now,
The precise line is dedicated to the destruction of the greatest monuments of Altmer civilizations.
which
From
is
the
which
PG
is
third.
which would be the Crystal-like Law.
Yep.
So,
Horrifying.
so the last or organization that acted like this was the Sijics, and they left the Somerset Isles for Artaeum because of how strenuous the way of life was among them. So the Thalmor are transforming Aldmer society as we know it. Now they may be a little I lost my train of thought. Sorry. So,
okay, good. I thought we lost you all together for a second there.
Yeah.
We bet.
because as I was saying, because this is like the first time, if we're now counting Aaron, since that the Aldmer have taken interest in Tamriel since Torpal left the Isles. I mean, this is a long ass time ago. This is like the Merithic era.
Mm-hmm.
And to see them in such strength now, like managing to within the end of the Third Empire into what I would call the Proto Fourth Empire, to be able to marshal enough people to defeat the Empire of Man, even in its weakened position. I mean, that's huge.
Would they be able to defeat the Empire of Man?
They already have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't know of any, we don't know if Mead has any offspring. So for all we know, it could be we could be going into an interregnum right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the next new empire, which is so I've been working on shit. My next empire thing is going to be the Red Guards invading and establishing the last human empire.
Oh man.
Okay.
Paul
That's-
Kirkbride.
Anyway,
That's pretty dope.
what I was getting to was that Thalmor are acting wrong, I would say, and I don't know if I really believe that they want to become free spirits again, because they're still trapped and slaves to the tyranny of the Dreamer. Therefore, I'm wondering if the inner circle are actually Lorcanites.
Actually, what?
Lorcanites, people who Aldmeri believers in Lorcan,
Wow.
because I understand why they want to. Because from this angle, I understand why they want to destroy Talos through banning his worship, banning his name, banning his banning his. I'm just going to say crap because I've lost the term, because he is the binding force. He's the static force that keeps the Mundus together, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Currently,
Well, he's certainly in. He's definitely the incarnation of it.
yeah, we've called him in the past. We call him the second convention, almost, right?
Mm.
So if what we know that the world always returns to the dawn before a new convention is established in a Chaldaic cycle, wouldn't we have to destroy Talos first in order to remake the world?
Well, that's what Alduin was for.
Yeah.
Well, not just Alduin. It's just how things tend to happen. So I'm just wondering, because we say we have this this meme at this point that the Thalmor win.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does win mean? Because really, Lorcan already won when any Kindster goes, "Hey, I'm Kaiman, and I'm potentially becoming my own dream, if you will." Because based on what we know, that is what Lorcan's mission was.
Well, here's my thought on the subject of how the Thalmor win. And for those watching, when we say the Thalmor win, that's based on a post Michael Kirkbride did an AMA on Reddit a while back, and he mentioned that the Thalmor win. Now, whether you're a fan of Kirkbride or not, I mean that's what he says. So in his universe, the ones that we might call the Coda-verse, that's has to do with the Coda and the love letter and all of that. I mean, if you accept that, great. If not, then I mean, I guess ignore what I'm going to say. But the idea in my mind is that the Thalmor want to return to a time where they, being elves and the descendants of the Elnathay, want to return to a time or untime, the dawn, where they were not limited by the constraints of Mundus. Because and this goes back to the dichotomy between man and mer, right? So men see Mundus as this beautiful thing. They can experience life, and life is finite, and so we should enjoy it while we have it. And they see that as kind of a gift, right? Whereas the mer see it as a trap. Oh, we used to be these limitless, timeless beings who went on forever. Why would we want to not be that anymore, right? And so these two different ways of looking at the dawn and what the Elnathay were during the dawn really informs on this concept. So the Thalmor want to return to that untime where they were immortal and timeless and perfect, and men, by virtue of simply existing because of Lorcan and Talos, they make that transition back to what they were basically impossible, at least within the current Kalpa. Whether that's something that they intend to reenact in the next Kalpa, I don't know. I guess because they want to remove the possibility of men entirely, they know that they can return to it, but they're always going to end up back in Mundus. So when Kirkbride says, "Oh well, they win," I think he's referring to Numidia. Because who was the first casualty at landfall? That would be the High Elves, the Aldmeri. They take Ancestral Scythe right to the face and are deleted. They are no longer trapped in Mundus, and they win that way. They have become, in a sense, a timeless, immortal thing by not existing. They followed the path of the Dwemer to become, Numidian skin, but you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think the problem is that I'm not saying that that's not what happened, but I am saying that I suspect it's. I could probably argue that it wasn't, because the Altmer, if the Altmer goal was to become, was to not exist, then they know full well that things like zero summing happens. There's plenty of opportunities. There's plenty of ways for them to manage that.
Yeah,
To remove themselves from the Arbus altogether. What I'm suggesting is that the Altmer goal was, well, okay. So I'm gonna back up even further than that. Depending on how, I mean, the difference largely between the mortal perspectives on, and I'm overgeneralizing here, the mortal perspectives on the nature of the universe and elven perspectives on the nature of the universe is whether or not what Lorcan did was a gift or a curse. Nobody really argues what Lorcan did didn't happen, and nobody really argues that some people weren't in favor of what Lorcan did. But the only arguments that are generally being put forward by disparate cultures are whether or not Lorcan tricked the Aedra into doing what they did, or whether he convinced them and they joined of their own free will. There's a lot of variation there depending on what culture. It's not just man versus mare at that point, but it's man versus man in some cases, or whatever. And in some very distant outliers, there are cultures that don't believe that there was any convincing that happened whatsoever. The Redguard culture, for example, seems to suggest that the Redguard creation myth seems to suggest that the creation of Mundus happened all the time inevitably as part of the Kalpic cycle. And indeed, if you take my personal approach, that actually doesn't contradict the idea of Lorcan being a trickster. But what it comes down to is whether or not Lorcan's act was one of compassion or was one of good or evil, right? So if no matter what perspective you take on it, almost all cultures agree that at one point or another, the beings that are now currently considered to be mortals, both man and mare, were at one point or at one point were related to infinite beings that existed in an infinite realm of all time and all space, and that limitation was placed in that realm in order to create the mortal realms, or realm, I should say. So the idea that taking the difference between the Altmer point of view and the or maybe just the Thalmor point of view and the Dwemer point of view is that the Dwemer wanted out of the Arbus altogether. The Altmer just wanted to return back to that pre-Dawn era, right? So that's sort of like the largely at that point the difference between the Thalmor and just a regular marish perspective on creation is that the Thalmor believed that act of creation can be undone, whereas other cultures believe that it's always going to be this way, or whatever, or it will stop being that way, but on its own natural accord. Like, for example, the Nordic belief that eventually Alduin will come and eat the entire universe, or at least the entire mortal realm, is seen as an event that is considered to be inevitable, that it's going to happen at some point. The Thalmor variation of that would be, well, we're just going to eat it for him, you know?
Yeah, effectively, as above, so below, all things are tied to the arcane cycle. And I saw you going to say something, Michael. You want to interject?
Yeah, I got two things. So, one of my thoughts, I'm gonna be a little controversial. One of my thoughts about when am I ever controversial about the motivation of the Thalmor and the Altmer goes back to an idea in certain forms of Buddhism called samsara, and it's the idea. Yes, this one's for you, Chris. This is for you. It's the idea. We have a weird view of reincarnation in the West. Like, we see it as a good thing. And it, in certain forms of Buddhism, it's not a good thing. It's a prison. And oh, hello. Something That didn't go wrong. You okay?
Oh yeah, no, I tried balancing my webcam to make my mic a little better, but
Okay.
it fell over.
Okay. So, in certain forms of Buddhism, reincarnation is considered samsara, or that translates roughly to endless wandering. So, if you think about the process of the soul in Elder Scrolls, you're born, you live, you gain your experiences, whatever. When you die, your soul returns to the dream sleeve. That's a whole other cast. And eventually, you're stripped of memory, and your soul, as kind of the rough creacious stuff, is recycled back into the mundus. It's a kind of reincarnation, but without memory. And yes,
It's not called the material prison for no reason.
exactly. And so for the Altmer, then the problem is that there's no escape. That even if you die, you're still going to end up coming back. You know, your AE, your soul stuff is going to keep returning. And my suspicion is that this whole thing of be freed from mortality, return to what I would call the possibility of patamaic dissipation. That's another one. But all that stuff is to be free of the samsaric cycle. So
Yeah.
that's my main thought. Other thing is kind of a sidebar, and maybe we'll get into this later. We talk about the idea of Talos being Talos, Tal, and then apostrophe Os, which is that Talos is the operating system of the Arbus. And we could maybe get into that, but the basic idea that man sets the tone now, and that not only are the Altmer or Aldmer trapped in the samsaric cycle, but they're also trapped in a cycle of human perception and are subject to human mythical weakness.
So if they are going to escape, though, why is the Aldmeri Dominion, the Thalmor, whatever, going about it this way is something that's kind of struck me over the last few points, because you look at what Auriel did. Auriel was very, very different in how he carried on. He reascended in full view of everyone after having defeated the armies of Lorcan and so on and so forth. So why is there not a path of reenacting what Auriel did and becoming and following that sort of a way of life and that sort of a pattern, which feels quite different to what most people think the Thalmor seem to be doing.
So I think they're trying to cheat.
Okay.
So to take a step back a little bit, the Lorcan is a trickster deity. Most trickster deities, like in real world mythology, are sort of like the peasant deity. Usually peasants really like them. Noble, the rich, the people who are in charge don't really like them. And I think that really shows, man is sort of like the peasant of the mundus, and Mer they want to rule it. They want to emulate Ariel and become ruling kings, and that's why the towers were built. Well, the towers are going away, and they haven't really worked for a lot of people, and so now they're trying to kind of cheat around the system to become ruling king. They want to become Brahmin, to use the Hindi reference. They want to reach the ruling station of the Arbus.
I agree 1,000%. Yes.
They may see, and I think that's why I came up with this Lorcan thing being the origin of the new Thalmor, is because even though Ariel ascends and he claims to be a ruling king, if he comes back every cycle, he's not a ruling king.
I'm not.
Maybe not. Let me put it to you this way. Speaking of, like, I'm liking that we're talking about samsara and the karmic cycle and reincarnation and so on, because depending on what variation of the cycle of reincarnation you're talking about, depending on what culture you're bringing up, one common thread that happens in a lot of cultures is they talk about the act of reincarnation and the cyclical nature of the universe as a way of removing impurities through suffering, basically, of becoming divine through suffering.
Okay.
So one of the ideas, one of the ways of interpreting Mundus and the Arbic cycle is that Lorcan intended for the Aedra to gain the spirits that become the Elnathe, that become mortals, to gain a system through which they could effectively filter themselves and I'm using filter because I don't want to use the word torture, but that's what keeps trying to come out of my head. But to effectively through incalculable effort, through pain and torment, to improve themselves through suffering, so that they can find a way to escape the cycle altogether. So in that conceptualization, it makes an event like Kirkbride's Amaranth and Coda makes the most amount of sense as the inevitable product of Mundus and Lorcan's end game, so to speak, is to create a condition through which people can escape the Kalpic cycle and no longer have to deal with a cyclical, infinite, torturous, or just an infinite cycle of some kind.
So the
Which is why
Amaranth
there's Daedra.
Right.
So that's why there's Daedra. That's why his wheel had the holes to create.
Well, yeah, that's why, to be blunt, the arena exists. That's why the Mundus is called the arena, is because that's where death happens. That's where suffering happens. And it's only through suffering that you can gain purity, basically.
Yeah, and so, suffer long, it'll set you free. Through tragedy, we find the strength we need.
Right.
Right.
You can't improve yourself if you're not tested. All proper tests are painful. You can't, and therefore, if you're in a cycle without where no tests can happen, in other words, where you can't fail, in other words, where there is no linear time and death and pain, then you can't improve yourself. And that's what Lorcan's goal was, basically, to create a torturous environment through which the spirits of the Aetherius could improve themselves.
So,
go ahead.
Sorry. So picking up on that, if the Thalmor are trying to cheat that system and just almost accelerate the Kalpic cycle, so that nothing, in a way, so that everything winds back to the dawn. If we are assuming that destroying the towers does that, which is a huge assumption, I know. But was Crystal Lake Lore an inside job?
Well, I would say it absolutely was, because
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
we go to ask, who invited Mayron's Dagon to Tamriel, and we go on that spiel.
Okay.
So, lastly, going back to, I would say, I guess, Hinduism. Schism of that is Buddhism. And from my very, very mundane understanding of it, so Kaim is often compared to Nirvana, which Nirvana is the escape from the karmic cycle through enlightenment.
No. Kim would be enlightenment. The Amaranth would be.
Yeah, I've always likened Kim. I've always likened Kim to lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Kim is Botta Vista rather than anything else,
Right.
as far as I see it.
I think I got my terms mixed up, but yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's an interesting thought on the Mythic Dawn on the Mythic Dawn side of things, because if you look at the way that the second Dominion happened, that came about over a squabble over the Valenwood dynastic succession. So are we thinking that, and which in a way may well tie in, you've got the obvious Cameron Bosma dynasty tie. Was that potentially the start of that? Then can we say that there is a connection between the way that the second Dominion acted in the second era,
Well-
or whatever it was, and then kind of propagated those ideas on, and Mankar Cameron was a kind of a logical extension of that to kind of just destroy everything. And
I would argue it started with the Veiled Inheritance in the First Dominion.
okay,
I mean,
Yeah.
even they used Dagon to try to
Mm.
get what their goal was.
That's true. That's true.
okay, that's,
So
and that puts Narfin in a whole different light as well.
So, what we wanted to talk about briefly also was why the Thalmor were in Coda consider the Numidium to be a good way to get their goals done. I'm not entirely convinced that the Numidium's arrival in landfall obliterated the Altmer.
I think they obliterated man.
Exactly.
That's what they were used. That's what he was set loose on. The Thalmor went, well, Tiber Septim, you tried to do it to us. Now we're going to do it to you and actually make it work.
Yeah, and like finish the
So-
job this time. Yeah.
So another thing I think, I'm seeing here that we have different ideas on what the Thalmor are, which is fine
Great.
with me because I think that's awesome. So one of the first things that Thalmor did is when they took power is they killed the royal family of Alinor.
Yeah.
So the queen of Alinor was Baron Zaya's daughter. So,
Hmm.
um,
Are you talking
Well,
about,
that's unfortunate.
That's not the first hold revolt you're talking about, is it? Or are we talking later?
this is after the Oblivion Crisis.
Okay. Okay.
So when the first thing they did was they purged, I guess what you would call the Vicars of the Empire. Those who rule in the Emperor's name. You could argue that
Yeah, 'cause-
the Dunmer did the same to Helseth, probably.
Yeah, because Morgaya, who was Baron Zaya's daughter, Helseth's brother, she was the queen of First
And-
Hold.
Yeah, and they had several children, and they were all murdered.
So did Baron Zaya have another daughter then?
Well, if we're
'Cause
not
I don't
including,
know. I know there's talk about Carlia, but I'm not necessarily.
yeah, there's a theory that Baron Zaya and Tiber did indeed have a child, and it was not aborted, and that there
Okay.
is, and that there is a direct line to Tiber Septim out there.
Well, that's going to be an interesting twist to TES 6.
But
That would be fantastic.
and the theory is it's Carlia, which I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's almost too convenient.
It is too
Very
convenient.
convenient.
It's a cool theory because if it's a cool theory, but it's just too convenient.
I think I'll put it to you this way. I'm really tired of games that make really like amazing
Obvious shit.
backgrounds and character, developments and like revelations about NPCs.
Mhm.
My whole I would not be surprised if that turns out to be the case and that they like at some point or another somebody officially recognizes Carlia as like the offspring of Berenzia and Tiber Septim, because it sounds like, I'll put it to you this way, it just sounds like the kind of thing that tends to happen in games, and that just pisses me off, and it just keeps happening. So I'm just assuming that the things that piss me off are always going to be the things that happen.
But here's the thing: even if that
And the
does
reason
happen-
why I don't like that, I should say, the reason why I don't like that in games is because I've got this idea that my character should be the most interesting motherfucker in the room.
Here
Mm.
is.
I mean,
there's a
is the game about me or ain't it?
Well,
you know what I mean?
even if, yeah, like I was saying, even if Carlia was the direct heir of Tiber Septim, it wouldn't matter because the Martinian covenant makes that all null and void.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
And
It's-
that goes. I think the lighting the fires actually is what makes them. The
Yeah,
Dragonborn,
exactly.
In my opinion, so
There's a book in Dragonborn, and I cannot remember for the life of me what it's called, that confirms that Carlia is because Baron Zaya got pregnant by her second husband, the Breton. They appear in Daggerfall, I believe.
Yes.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I can't remember what his name is.
Mhm.
She's at the end of the real Baron Zaya. She's pregnant with his child. That child is the mother of Carlia, and that is revealed because Carlia ends up going and finding her dad or her grandfather or something. I can't remember what the name of the book is, but I do remember reading it. So no, she is not the love child, thank God, of Baron Zaya and Tiber. That
Mhm.
I don't think that's
Yeah,
not going to happen.
And plus, the bloodlines of Tiber Septim are so convoluted and bullshit anyway. Like, no, I'm serious.
like the English bloodline.
No, there's so literally from after Pelagius, there is no direct bloodline in the Septim family from Tiber Septim. It's all from his quote unquote brother, Antor or something.
Hmm.
And that's
Argoneth.
from that. That's from it's from the first, like, I don't know, half rulers are from his bloodline, and then a cousin is skipped over, or a cousin is chosen because otherwise the heir would have been a dark elf again.
Hmm.
So it doesn't matter. Like, so far as we know, that there are literally still families and subfamilies of the Septim bloodline out there. Just because Martin was the last Septim, that just means he's the last Dragonborn Emperor. The last Emperor that had to light the dragon fires for
Yeah.
legitimacy, to keep the covenant.
Oh, Septim as a title. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So,
So Thalmor.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, we should probably get back on topic.
But anyway, so revolving around that, so Thalmor use their mirror logicians to bitch slap basically humanity and deletes them. But I don't see it as, so you know how generally dichotomies, they flip, right?
Mhm.
And this happens all the time in the Elder Scrolls. So humans have become annuitic in the way that they are comfortable in their world, I guess. They're comfortable with the way the world is. The Thalmor have become patomaic and realized they need to cut the fat off themselves and carry out the mission, which is to reach heaven through violence, to become enlightened, to become Amaranth, which is so it. Which when we say that the Thalmor win, the Thalmor can't win without Lorcan winning, because if there's a Kindster, that means the probability of there being an Amaranth is very high, and to prove that, any headcanon that appears can be argued to be an Amaranth through a whatever character they've invented, being a Kindster, and so on. The spiral.
So when I said earlier that ancestor sites is how they won, I didn't mean to imply that they intended to win that way. It was more like a TKO, in that you're in a boxing match and your opponent has a heart attack and dies. Like, that's you don't want to win that way, but I mean technically you won. So they just happened to get their out of the mundus by being omitted from it.
Mhm.
And that was kind of what I was trying to drive at, rather than that was their intent.
And wouldn't they win anyway, simply through the nature of the Calpic cycle? Because everything would go back to the dawn anyway.
No, because that's maintaining the cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Right.
cycle's gone. So
Yeah.
I would say it's won in a number of ways. Alduin is gone, and the cycle may be broken. Man is gone,
Oh,
and
wait, Jonathan, I think you just hit on it.
yeah,
Is it like we discover that the Thalmor bring back Numidium in sometime at the end of the 4th era to the 5th era?
right.
But the reason why they do that is not because it just dawned on them, oh shit, we're going to do this. Maybe the reason why they did that was because Alduin was gone and they realized that the Calpic cycle was not going to happen. And so their worst case scenario, which is, well, we just hang in with this mortal bullshit until the Calpic cycle takes back, brings everything back to normal again, they suddenly realized that's not going to happen anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they bring back Numidium, because they realize this is it. This is never going to go away, because the damn last Dragonborn fucked this whole system up.
Right, and we all know when Numidium lands, it breaks the dragon.
Right.
And Numidium has to go away in order for that dragon to come back. And he doesn't ever really go away until Jubal, who then heals the heart hole, eliminating the cage, etc., etc.
Where did we find out that it's the Thalmor who summoned Numidium? Because
I'm confused about that too.
That's not my understanding.
If I recall correctly, we're basically guessing that's because
I just assumed it was a displacement in time caused by the warp in the west. Okay.
Right.
He just got shunted out because the Jills were like, well, we don't know what the fuck to do with this. Let's put him over here for now while we fix this. Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought there was somewhere where it was the Mirror Logicians that
the Mirror Logicians
they were fighting him. Yeah, they were fighting him until the 5th era. And so they, in order to stop fighting him, what do they have to do? They have to get rid of him. Go back to Tamriel Prime. Go.
Yeah, what I had in my head was that the Mirror Logicians just stopped fighting Numidium and just let him break out.
Yeah, because they were fighting him in like a pocket universe or something.
Well, in all the various shards of the universes of the main universe that became real when Numidium first showed up and broke the dragon the first time.
Yes.
And after all that, and so even though that Numidium disappeared in Tamriel Prime, that still left an infinite number of other universes that he was still dicking around doing his thing, and so the Mirror Logicians had to, gaze into those dimensions and fight the Numidium that way.
Right. Yeah, my pet theory, of course, is that it was actually the last men who summoned Numidium as the final way to stop the Thalmor, who were winning. But that's total headcanon. So,
so we've been at this for about almost an hour.
57 minutes. Yeah.
I don't know if we want to open up the wormhole that is Iran and possibly Kinyon.
Oh boy.
Why wouldn't we?
Oh, I would love to talk about Iran. Never mind Kinyon. I've got my own pet theories about what she was doing anyway. Because Andrew, did you want to kick us off with that, seeing as you opened the can?
Yeah. So I'll just pry that open. So the idea is that Kinmun, who is an Nth era mining proxy, wasn't she mining more house out of Kinnereth or something like that? That was the idea. Went back in time, and there's a theory that she's inside the Eye of Magnus at Starthal for a while, and that has to do with the 7 fights of Aldudaga, where there's a big battle there. And it's thought that she's freed from there, and one way or another she ends up assuming the role of Queen Iren and founds the first Aldmeri Dominion. Now with ESO, a lot of that theory has kind of fallen out of favor If I recall, in the Imperial City, there's an NPC who's crazy who talks about Iren being, a robot imposter or something.
Yeah, that was great.
Which is kind of Zos pointing and laughing at us a little bit. But I'm really interested in the proxy queen that we're going to see in Somerset, and I think that naming, while it's apt in its own right, I feel like it wasn't chosen by happenstance, and that Alor Winaway, who is the proxy queen of Alinor, while Iren is off.
Yeah, it's odd to me that they choose to call it proxy queen rather than a Vicar.
Yeah, I always thought it would be a really elegant way to kind of mend the gap between the Kinmune equals Iren theory, and then also keeping it so that Iren isn't actually Kinmune. Because whether it's Iren isn't really the issue, it's whether the leadership role among the Aldmeri Dominion is, Kinmune, and the proxy queen could take that role. So it's the seat of Iren without actually being Iren. So it's like we get the best of both worlds. Throw some Hannah Montana in there.
Yeah, let's not lie though. She's going to be a Mytholin cultist. We all know this.
Yeah. So and I mean, there was a letter that Zos put out, kind of a teaser for Somerset. Iren addressing Alor Winaway, the proxy queen, and calling her cousin, and you're so great to step up to all this and everything, and so I wonder if I'm wondering if Zos is going to put some Kinmune stuff in there without being like, haha, hey, she's a robot.
I'm wondering if they're gonna make her connect the second era Thalmor to the fourth era Thalmor. Hear me out here. In that letter, Iren talks about how Arinaway, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, how she's very traditionalist, very Altmer-centric, and how she's not going to like the idea of opening up the borders. So I am personally hoping for that, but yeah.
Yeah, because the take I got on Iren as to why she founded the Dominion in the first place was that this was after her kind of her gap year, basically. That she went traveling around Tamriel, saw everything, did loads of stuff with many and various people, and then came back, said it's all rubbish. The men need to rule it all.
That's all shit.
Yeah,
I disagree with that. I think
well, this is horrible. We need to fix it.
that
was kind of my take on it.
She did it out of love, not hate.
Yeah, I do agree. I agree with that. I think Iren is she's racist in that she wants everyone to be as good as Altmer and thinks that they're not as good, and she wants more unity with everyone as opposed to the Thalmor fourth era who hate everyone, and if you're not with us, you're against us.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can also see that in
well, it's not like this hasn't happened before. Aliens.
It's kind of the white Mer's burden is the way I thought I phrased it popped into my head.
So let's dispel this space Nazi shit. So we gotta
just get it out there.
We gotta go to the Void Knights. So
it took us an hour, but we're there.
Yeah, we gotta go to the Void Knights. So a theory that I still like, even though it's in support of the space Nazi bullshit, is that the Void Knights were an effort to revert or to break the Khajiit out of the lunar lattice and thus revert them into Mer.
Yeah.
And I think they succeeded.
Then why did they stop?
I see Michael shaking his head. No.
Why did they stop? Well, they got a bunch of stuff. But
I don't know if you
they succeeded with one, and then they quit. But
I was just gonna say I got into a heated argument with one of the guys in one of the lore groups about this, and that was my exact point. Is then why did they stop? And the reason they stopped is because Khajiit were never Mer.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But that's a whole other. I'll save that for the Khajiit.
I was going to say the next question is if the Khajiit aren't, what does that make the Bosmer? But let's not open that one.
They're
No,
not
Bos-
Mer either.
Bosmer armor. Bosmer armor.
They became Mer. But
They became Mer. As the Elnofe wear their ideology as skin, their ideology changed away from the forest people and into Aldmeris. But and I think the Thalmor know that. You can see in the college in I think it's Aradon. You can, or maybe I don't remember now. There are some Bosmer who are swearing allegiance to the Thalmor, and they have to denounce the Green Pact.
They do, yeah.
Yeah, and in the Fourth Era, we have evidence that the Thalmor are leading programs against the Green Pactors, which never ends well for anyone, but apparently they're doing it.
And as a sidebar, just to jump back to the Khajiit thing, as far as the Void Knights, we do have an out-of-game comment by MK that says that it was a eugenics experiment.
Right.
So, but anyway, yeah, Bosmer, yeah. I forgot to mention that earlier.
So I would wonder why the Thalmor thought the eugenics experiment was necessary.
Because they need foot soldiers for the war against man.
Okay.
Yep. Shore has his sovereign guard.
What?
They need their soldiers.
I was going to say, why aren't the Khajiit good enough foot soldiers as they are? What
Well, they might have been, but they weren't loyal to the Thalmor, I think is what Michael's suggesting.
That's it.
Right. So
they don't.
Why would screwing with their children make them more loyal?
Because they brought back the moons, and therefore they
bringing back the moons. Yeah.
Therefore,
bringing back the moons, I can totally see as a tool for loyalty.
Heroes.
But
okay.
But
so as
why
of right now,
the eugenics? Why is the eugenics?
They don't know Aldmeris. They don't. So all Aldmer. So all the Mer have the memory of Aldmeris. Khajiit don't. And so by reverting them back to their Elnophaic state, which I think was the idea, they are trying to bring them back to what they believe that they were before. Which, if Bosmer are Mer and if Khajiit and Bosmer come from the same Elnophaic stock, then Khajiit must be Mer. Therefore, if we make them Elnophay again, they'll be Mer, and then they'll remember Aldmeris. I think that's generally the idea, and I think it failed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. When I say they succeeded, I'm wondering if they did succeed on a little bit of level by making them subservient. These Khajiit are going to want to connect themselves more culturally to the Aldmeri Dominion, and therefore they will myth make an Aldmeris.
I think I see where you're going with that. Yeah.
You see where I'm going? So you're gonna have Khajiit that say, yeah, Aldmeris exists. It may not be in any of their current myths, but they'll make one.
It's like a new Aldmeris.
Yeah.
Well, Aldmeris is a fiction anyway.
It's an idea.
So
I think part. So anyway, I don't want to say too much because Khajiit cast and also Beyond Skyrim elsewhere. But so the trick with the Khajiit is that they have so the real divide, the real problem among many others, but the easiest one to understand, the real problem between man and Mer is that men accept creation and Mer reject it. The Khajiit accept creation. You can see this in words of Clanmother Onissi to her favorite daughter, where it's that whole thing about, but the Khajiit forgave Lorecast, and Nirni was happy because she could have children, etc., etc. So they had kind of embraced creation, and hence, from the Aldmeri perspective, were men. And so part of this whole process is to convert them, and so now as a client race, they're also foot soldiers. I think it's my view. This has not been said by anybody else, but it's my view. They're the fodder.
I
totally agree.
Another related question to that: why would the Dominion break up elsewhere? In that case, why do we have
Divide
Aquitaine
and
and
conquer.
Palatine?
Yeah, divide and conquer.
Yeah.
It's there's enough cultural differences between Palatine and Anaquina that like they work together pretty well, but when you start messing with the Khajiit mythos because you want to rewrite it as to be something else, New Aldmeris, divide and conquer.
Yeah,
That's why
and
the
I-
main has to go.
What's that?
That's why the main had to go.
Oh yeah,
He's a unifying force. Without him, they can defeat the Khajiit.
easily, yeah, because the main is the stone of the Khajiit tower.
So then the goal was to neutralize the Khajiit tower.
Yeah.
How
Yeah,
was
and
that
then-
in a eugenics experiment?
Well, that was how do I want to say? Well, see, okay, so here's the thing: the main was assassinated. When was the main? It was before or after the Void Knights.
It was definitely before. It
was before.
I think it was after the Oblivion Crisis, before the Void Knights.
I can't. Yeah, I don't remember the date. I'd have to look it up. But
Okay.
that was all the setup for the eugenics. Like, remember,
Yeah.
it's the idea of they're going to change the mythos.
So it's the idea of, well, let's try and get rid of the stone, see if that does something. Oh no, wait, it doesn't. We need to pull some more extreme stuff.
Yeah.
And so you get the Void Knights.
But again, this is my perspective. Who knows? If we're lucky, Test 6 will be set in elsewhere. Please. And
So-
we'll find out for sure. But
Yeah, Nelson's shaking his head. I'm just like, unless you're giving it to Schick, I don't trust it.
Main
now.
was assassinated sometime before 49,
Okay,
Fourth
yeah.
Era, according to the Lord of Souls.
Okay.
Void Knights were 98 to 100.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So it might be a good idea to talk a little bit about how the Thalmor operate. In the respect, I mean, we've already seen them in Skyrim as, a sort of a mix of like military investigators meet assassins meet
Gestapo.
who knows.
Well,
And
Just to go back to the metaphor, we've seen them as stormtroopers.
yeah, sort of, but a little bit more enabled, I think, than your average stormtrooper.
Yeah.
Individually, the Thalmor that we meet in Skyrim have ranks and such, but their officers
so-
definitely seem to be sort of like the SS. Oh wait, I did the damn Nazi thing again.
Oh, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, so I was gonna make a comparison between Hans Landa and Inglourious Bastards, and he would be a Thalmor, no problem.
Well, there's also, I mean, we only see the Thalmor who are fighting against man. We don't see the Thalmor diplomatic force that's.
Yeah,
I mean,
Right.
in ESO we do see. I mean, this is the second era Thalmor.
and they have to
and
be
they-
trained to not be racist.
Well, kind of. If you go to Aldmeri Dominion, like they have like a college or a recruitment center or something, you can see them like they're straight up berating like Khajiit and Wood Elves like out there in the open.
Right, and that's the Veiled Heritance, which
Oh,
is
yeah, okay.
that's the Veiled.
Well,
Which
Well,
that's a whole other. I have
because
many theories, but
the Veiled Inheritance was a split from that Aldmeri Dominion.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's
and-
it's like the shadow of the ultimate.
Yeah. Well, what I'm talking about, like, this was an area where there were no enemies for you to fight, like no hostiles there. It was to walk
Yeah,
into this
you're-
area, and you've got people doing push-ups, and it's like a boot camp kind of thing.
Yeah, they're training people. They're training Khajiit, Bosmer, and Altmer to join the ranks of the Thalmor to become fists of the Thalmor and stuff, or something political. I can't remember the exacts, but
yeah, I think it was.
they've been infiltrated by the Veiled Heritance, and
Well,
so
there's a book I found in.
I know what I'm talking about. The diplomatic Thalmor guide, basically, and they have to like it's to Altmer Thalmor to tell them how to interact with the Bosmer and the Khajiit. Stuff
Yeah.
like don't call Bosmer shorty, don't grab a Khajiit's tail.
Yeah,
Oh, those are great. Yeah.
I've got it open right here.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Yeah,
I
I've
couldn't
got
find
it.
it.
So I can read the whole thing, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm just going to read.
Oh,
the
please
whole
do. It's
thing.
awesome. Or at least read the good bits.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
read the whole
good
thing.
bit
So
for
it's,
sure, it's
it's
great.
titled Thalmor Handbill by Icantar of Shimmerine. And he is the patriarch of indoctrination. It says, loyal citizens of the Isles, heed the statement of the Thalmor. Bear witness to these words about our new allies, the Khajiit and Wood Elves. Integration with our new Wood Elf and Khajiiti allies continues apace. To promote alliance harmony, loyal Thalmor agents have drawn together the short list of helpful notices. Follow this mandatory guidance with cheer, and our new allies will look on you with favor. First, do not refer to Khajiit as cats, kitties, fuzzies, that's my favorite, or any other derogatory feline-based term. Khajiiti delicacies are often very sweet or spiced with the exotic substance known as moon sugar. Diners beware. Do not touch a Khajiit's tail without permission. The Khajiit have a unique dialect. Mocking their speech or imitating it is considered quite rude and non-Aldmeri. When inviting a wood elf to dine, know that the resources of the forest are sacred to them. Serve venison, but no salads. Do not refer to wood elves as shorties, runties, or any other derogatory height-based terms. Have a care when imbibing wood elf brews, as their beverages are very different than our own. Rotmuth.
Mhm.
Do not imply wood elves. Do not imply to wood elves that they are cannibals, or ask them how they dispose of their dead. Eagles unite.
That's
There's
the
another
that's
one.
the punchline for me. Don't ask them how they
I just-
dispose of their dead. You don't want to know.
There's
All I
another
want to
one.
say, all I want to say is the fun thing about rules is that somebody had to have done something once
Yeah, right.
to cause the need for the rule. Go back and reread that with that in
Yeah.
mind. And
Oh, yeah.
just wow.
There's another one, the Thalmor Diplomatic Corps notice, where it's got a bunch of those repeated, but another one is, if you own a pet cat, do not call Khajiit by your cat's name. Um,
Oh,
Yeah,
there's,
we lost
there's,
three
let's see.
political officials before we figured out that one.
Do not ask how Boss Mary flesh tastes.
oh,
Oh,
Oh, that's harsh.
That's like asking that's like asking someone whose grandma just died and then like it was tradition to do something with the ashes. Oh, how did
it good?
yeah.
like yeah?
Did
That's
your
fine.
Was it
grandma
yummy?
taste good?
So, did you light her on fire, or you just shove her in the ground like you usually do?
The other different one is do not ask how to cook a Khajiit.
Oh,
Oh,
that's in a book. That's in a book. That's
That
in a
is-
Dance and Fire.
Yeah, it's in a Dance and Fire. And you actually have the same plate. It's discussed in ESO again as well, where there's a dude who it's a quest where a dude who wrongs the Bosmer tribe. They're going to cook his wife and feed her to him.
Oh,
Jesus.
Yeah. I
Dude, the
remember that
Bosmer are
quest.
great.
So I have a glaring question. That last thing on the Thalmor Diplomatic Corps notice, it says, "Do not ask how to cook a Khajiit. Do they eat Khajiit normally?"
No, not really. The Green Pact dictates that they have to eat their
No,
own.
I'm talking about the Thalmor. Do the
They-
Thalmor?
No, it's they're asking the Bosmer how to cook Khajiit.
yeah. And
I
it's
see.
also the
Yeah.
bottomless thing about eating your enemies. If you're thinking about the skirmishes that have gone on
Oh, I
between
see.
Khajiit
Okay,
and
okay.
Bosmer.
You do have to. So a little small tangent. The Green Pact dictates that Bosmer only have to eat Bosmer. They still
Okay.
will
Right.
eat others, but they only have to eat themselves because otherwise, that just gets complicated and messy when the Khajiit attack.
Okay.
Dirty cats. Sorry.
Anyway,
Anywho,
this one is not offended.
So yeah, so I don't know. I don't know. How do you guys feel about this? You think we covered everything?
So I just want to interject. So the fourth era Thalmor that we see in Skyrim are acting under Imperial law. Remember this: under Imperial law, under the White Gold Concordant, to enforce Imperial law. And it's so. I guess what I'll call the Talos heresy is is now against imperial cult dogma, right? If we can even say they have much dogma.
I guess.
Mhm.
Which actually, if we observe, imperial society, we'll see that, religion has always been subservient to the, to the government.
Yeah.
And has very little dogma because of it, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, they're under imperial law. They are enforcing this.
Mhm.
So, their inquisition, if you can call it that. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just I lost my train of thought, to be honest.
Well, I mean,
Okay.
when it comes to how the Empire is dealing with getting rid of Talos from the Nine, or the Nine in general, it in a way, what they're really doing is just reverting back to their culture largely before Tiber Septim, or at the time of Tiber Septim, if you think about it. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
the idea. So as far as Imperials go, Imperials have. Well, no, I don't. I mean, it's possible. Okay, we know that the Nordic reaction to the White Gold Concordat was very bad, because the Nords consider Talos to be a Nord
Dragonborn
god.
god. Yeah, a Dragonborn god, the Twilight god.
However, the Empire, Skyrim, may not. I mean, Cyrodiil's culture may not have had as big of an objection, but I suspect they did. I mean, it could
Certainly within the Legion.
Yeah, certainly. Now, you could make the argument that the Empire, that Imperials do not feel as loyal towards the concept of Talos, but I don't really buy that. I'm pretty sure they do,
Maybe in
because
the East, but definitely
Talos
not
and
in the
Tiber
West.
Septim in particular, Tiber Septim was an emperor of Cyrodiil. I would say that they probably have the same level, if not. I can't imagine to be even more, reactionary or any more vehement, but definitely at around the same level of objection as Skyrim's. It's just the reason why Skyrim was able to form the rebellion that they did was because they literally weren't Cyrodiil. The Empire just didn't have that much of a presence in it.
Yeah, and especially, well, if we go back to game design things, you got to remember that Eastern Skyrim was conservative, totematic Skyrim.
Yeah.
Whereas Western Skyrim was,
Yeah.
I would say, a Alessianized Skyrim.
Yeah.
Meaning-
A little more. I want to use the word. What word do I want to use? I mean, they had exposure and frequent trading with.
Cosmopolitan.
Yeah, cosmopolitan. That's what I want to use. They had a lot of exposure and trading to Cyrodiil and High Rock and Hammerfell, whereas Eastern Skyrim had a constant, unending, awful war
yes.
with the Dark Elves,
Yeah.
Mm.
and not much else.
Yeah. But
So yeah.
So I would say, like I said earlier, in the west of Skyrim, people are definitely pissed. In the east of Skyrim, maybe not as much. But then again, I don't really subscribe to that, because so you have Alessia, the God Empress, who was succeeded by Raymond, the God Emperor, who is succeeded by Talos, the God Emperor, and the previous God Emperor's wane when a new one comes along.
Sure.
I guess they're relegated to saints.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
So we better be having a Redguard God King come out of the west here soon to replace Talos.
That
indeed.
could happen.
Well,
Could happen.
I mean, the main objection of the Thalmor to Talos in general, and unfortunately for Talos, holds up really well, which is that
Men can't be gods.
the ascension of a mortal to a god is impossible. if that was the case, then the Altmer wouldn't be focusing on getting rid of Mundus. They'd be focusing on ways to ascend everybody to a god. They would be chasing after whatever's left of the heart of Lorcan, because then if they admit that a mortal can become a god, then the tribunal were gods. And they patently weren't. In fact, the biggest problem that the tribunal had was that they weren't gods. And the same thing applies to Tiber Septim. Tiber Septim, at his most powerful, was a foil for Almsevi, but he was not more powerful than Almsevi. So, I mean, even the Hunding was just obscenely powerful, and the Hunding left. The Hunding's not a problem anymore. He just reincarnates every once in a while as some schmuck pirate. So when it comes down to the argument of the Thalmor, they're at the very least very fair about it. They're saying no human can become a king, no mortal can become a king, and therefore we've got the situation we've got. If they had figured out any way to turn mortals into gods, they would have done it by now, basically.
Yeah, to be fair, they spent a lot of time in Crystal Lake Law. Yeah.
In fact, one thing that you can definitely say that's somewhat complementary towards the Thalmor is that they don't bring up old shit. It seems to me like the goal of the Thalmor is so very specific that if they could find a way to become gods and leave, they wouldn't hang around to bitch slap people around with their godlike power. They'd just leave. It's one of the things that we sort of experimented with when we were outlining the motivation of the Thalmor in Tatterdemelion, was we were talking a lot about the idea that hello, Felix.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Felix!
Hey!
Felix. Huzzah!
Hi. Sorry. I've been absent. I was following this along earlier, but I had to go drop someone off at church. Where are we? I've missed like the past 25 minutes or so.
We're just talking about whether or not I'm bringing up the idea of whether or not the Thalmor hate men or mortals in general. And what the general like emotional level is of the Thalmor, which is that it was suggested to me that the Thalmor view removal of mankind or mortals as the removal of a flaw from an otherwise perfect calculation. That it's not that they're doing what they do not because they hate men or mortals, but rather just because this is the right way to do things. So.
Right. Okay. I'm going to jump right in on that because I had a note that I made about this earlier. That is more or less correct, but I would take it a step farther and say that the Thalmor essentially want to kill what I think might be the ego as represented by mankind. Because if we think of Mundus and the whole dream of the Godhead as being two halves of your brain, left hemisphere and right hemisphere, then the whole aspect bubbles down, right? We had Anu and Padme, and their interplay is what creates this area in between. And in order to try and understand themselves, there's lower and lower subgradients. And at the end of those subgradients, you eventually get men and mer. And so to remove man is to essentially remove one half of the brain. And the Thalmor are essentially trying to make the whole of the Godhead brain dead to a certain extent because they want to remove that aspect because that aspect is tying them down to Mundus as a result of the interplay. Going on to another point that was said earlier is Chim was attributed to like not samsara, but I think just sort of the greater aspect of
Nirvana,
an endless cycle.
I think.
Because the way I would describe it is Chim is more like the Hindu concept of moksha, and Amaranth is the actual aspect of nirvana.
That's what I was trying to figure out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
All right. So yes, there we go. That's my main comment from what I saw earlier.
Great. Thanks for that. Thank you. It was really driving me crazy.
Thank you for correcting me. Like I said, my understanding of those religions are very rudimentary at best.
Yeah, join the club.
But I think the Thalmor are leveraging the animosity against men on the what I would call "quote unquote" outer Thalmor, whereas the inner Thalmor, the guys with the plan, the men are simply just a barrier to surpass.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Mm.
Mhm.
I think the like if Bethesda played it right, they could make, if we met the inner circle, if you will, of the Thalmor, we would like them. We would agree with them.
Yeah.
They'd be Mankar Cameron, but more charismatic, more sane, and just like, listen, it's nothing against you, but we got to reach heaven through violence, buddy.
Even necessarily about them reaching heaven so much as it is that a fundamental aspect of Mundus, which is the interplay between Anu and Padme and their respective subgradients. One half of that is directly responsible for the way things are. And so if they can remove that or escape that somehow, that's not so much reaching heaven by violence so much as it is deleting heaven as a concept.
Yeah.
Well, the way I interpret it.
It's an antivirus approach is what it is. Yeah.
I don't know, because heaven.
Yeah.
Antivirus approach, Michael. Antivirus approach. I pay attention.
Well, here.
That would be the main. The main is the antivirus. But anyway, moving on from that.
So
I want to throw this out there, and maybe this is something to save for the Aldmeri cast. But one of the things that we've been talking about on Beyond Skyrim elsewhere, and that I really want to explore, is that because of Skyrim, we all think high elf equals Thalmor equals Nazis. Let's just be honest.
Yeah,
but it's not. There's at least 3 different things going on there. The Thalmor are like a ruling body / secret police, but the Dominion is something different, because the Dominion includes all three of those races, and then there's the Altmer race itself. And thank God for ESO, because it gives us at least some hints of Altmer culture. And to me, the interaction of those 3 things is just fascinating.
Yeah.
And I am hoping against hope that whenever this current cycle that began in Skyrim, that somewhere in there we end up on Alinor, because I want to dig deep and really see how that plays out.
Yeah. There's actually a specific text in ESO somewhere that talking about the fists of the Thalmor, about how they desperately didn't want that to be conflated with the Justicars, and how they're fundamentally different things, and it's undermining trust and here, there, and the other. It's that almost strikes me as a meta commentary about that. It's not that these organizations aren't monolithic, and that you've got those kind of shades and differences going on.
I think that's.
Well, right, and I
think that's the fists regarding Fists of the Thalmor. I think is what that's called.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's also the kind of another way of the kind of prodding of the Thalmor as the secret police. Aren founded them more or less as her executive arm, is the kind of takeaway that the Aren used the Thalmor and took them out from being the heritage organization to be her executive arm within the Dominion.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know why I have this impression, but I have a very strong impression that they existed before Aren.
Oh yeah. But instead of looking after the monuments and so on, they got dragged in to do political stuff. Or more political stuff.
Yeah, or they let themselves get dragged in, which.
So, would you call
certainly something which would help them? So it's the idea, but they exist now as this kind of this separate entity, this executive within Aren's government. I found a portion of the where is it? The preface, either in the preface or somewhere in the first pocket guide, which kind of treats the Thalmor as a similar thing as part of an organ of government. Has its my thoughts is it just kind of been thrumming along steadily in the background there, with kind of a goal of its own, being not exactly a state within a state, but something like that. That's kind of what I'm thinking of, and just kind of been steadily aligning itself in whatever direction for the thousands of years that it's been around.
Whomever leads, yeah.
Sorry?
whomever leads, they align themselves with.
So I'm wondering. I mean, I know they're like a
But-
different
Yeah.
kind of thing, but like the eyes of the queen, would we consider them Thalmor?
They would be well.
Ooh.
No, they're
So-
kind of like Secret Service.
They're like
KGB.
They're the blades of iron. They're the blades of iron.
Yeah, exactly.
They are.
Also,
They are the Pentus Oculatus. Pentius Oculatus.
Yeah, something like that. Penitus? Pentius?
Penitus
Something?
oculated.
Penitence. Yeah.
Something of that.
Yeah, I never get it right. It's
It's Latin.
yeah.
And also setting policy. I found the passage in the first pocket guide that triggered my memory. But Father, blessed be his name's numeric mystery, was one of the few on the Thalmor to oppose Androl Chrono's policy of non-intervention, that if continued will be the doom of the all elder races. So the Thalmor are somewhere on what I would call the cabinet, in terms of Aldmeri government.
as they are presented in Skyrim, they are the government.
Yeah.
They are the government of the Aldmeri Dominion. They are the
Yeah.
Well,
They
it
took
seemed
over
like they
in
were.
the wake of- they took over in the wake of the Oblivion Crisis. And
Right.
let's also try and remember that the Thalmor that we see in the Fourth Era is not the same Thalmor that we're currently seeing in
Indeed.
ESO in the Second.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
You know, a lot of things can change, and policies can change and go back and forth. And so probably, you know, the Thalmor and their more militaristic stance was a result probably after Tiber Septim came around
Mhm.
and basically unleashed the Numidium saying, yeah, I really want Alinor. And they said, well, fucking come and take them, Molan Labe. And then he did. And the Thalmor and Altmer in general are still very pissed off about that.
Yeah.
So that's probably where you would reasonably see some kind of policy shift or a new political order of sorts emerge from that rather dire situation for the Altmer.
Is
Mm.
The Thalmor as presented in ESO, I think, have to be talked about, keeping in mind that the Altmer and Thalmor of the Fourth Era are basically two different cultures at this point, because there's going to be a lot of differences that have occurred over like 1,000 years, right? So
That's not a long
Well, I don't
time.
know. I mean,
Yeah.
that actually, I would guess that if any organization was going to retain its fundamental mission statement, it would over 1,000 years, it would be the Thalmor, because
Yeah.
their
True.
whole organization is started on the principle of conserving, values, family values.
And you've got members that will last for hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's like 3-4 generations. It's
Yeah.
not
Would you,
a long
Yeah,
would you,
time.
right.
would you say it's a Reich that would last? 1,000?
Okay, they.
The full circle.
I had to.
Okay, so
Nailed
I
it.
just want to ask. So we came at from two different, going back to the motivations of the Fourth Era Thalmor. We came from two different directions. I'm saying they want. Well, okay, I'm just going to ask this: do they have a flawed ideology? Because if we're coming from it in the direction that you guys mostly are, you're saying that they believe they want to become untethered planes of existence among themselves again,
Mm-hmm.
but they are still slaves to the dream that way, so they don't achieve much.
Well, I mean,
I would disagree.
Yeah, I mean, just because they want to go back to being something, infinite, doesn't mean they want to escape the dream. Even, I mean, without the dream, they wouldn't be infinite in the first place. So the dawn takes place within the dreamer, within the Godhead. So, I mean, there is no infinite without that. It's just, whatever's outside that dream.
Right.
And so on and so forth. So,
Mhm.
I mean, we end up with this, infinite regress of okay, well, where does it end?
Well,
we left one dream, well, now we're in another.
I
Well,
would say they're
that's-
absolutely
Oh,
correct.
I'll put it to you this way. I think the goal here is not that the Thalmor wanted an let me amend something. The goal is not that the Thalmor wanted an escape from the Arbic cycle. The goal is that the Thalmor just want to return back to the state of like the Dawn era or pre-Dawn, pre-convention certainly.
Yeah.
So it's not that they have a problem with the Arbic cycle or the dream itself, just that they have a problem with the inevitable, arguably, part of the Arbic cycle, which is, the creation of
the
Mundus and such.
Mundus, yeah.
The reason why, if there is a flaw to the Thalmor's system of belief system is very logical and it makes a lot of sense, except that their system is predicated by the idea that the only state of existence or their preferred state of existence is one that exists within the dream of Anu, which is to say a dream that was inspired by an act of betrayal, a dream that that propagates the same pain or betrayal or injury that Anu experienced. And the idea behind the reason why the Amaranth in Coda is considered to be a better dream than Anu's is that, and the reason why it's considered to be the inevitable result of experiencing reincarnation through the grind of Mundus is that it creates a dream that comes from love and not fear.
Yep, and I think that my own little theory here, if you really want to get deep down into understanding what the Thalmor want, I actually think Sotha Sil has a very similar idea.
I
If
wonder
you
when you're
look
gonna bring
through
stuff still into it.
Yeah.
I have to. I just read all of these.
Now we're talking.
I think his concept of Anu Vanasi is very similar to what the Thalmor want. They want to rebuild a structured, limitless, organized, unified Dawn era,
Free of flaws.
free of flaws.
Although not as inherently opposed, as inherently opposed to mortality, as the Thalmor. I didn't see none ensuing as being somewhere where everyone lived forever as gods.
Yeah,
It's not identical, but it's similar.
No. Yeah.
Well, that's not very Velothi of him.
Okay, so I might as well throw it out there. So right, Jonathan and I have been trying to talk about the Truth in Sequence. I'd read it all before, but I never really took part in the major discussions. Fail on me, because I wanted to skip spoilers for Clockwork City. I had to work my way up to it. Anyway, blah blah blah. Sidebar, and maybe this is his own cast, but I am beginning to see a lot of strong correlations between Sotha Sil and Leto 2 from the Dune novels.
Aha.
God Emperor of Dune. And I could probably talk about this for hours, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about it. But there seem to be a lot of similar motivations, and that their perspectives on the progress of immortal life are pretty
Bringing
similar.
on good change.
It's the Nern final would be the Golden Path, or Clockwork City is the Golden. I don't know. I still have to work through all the sermons and really do the tough work with them. But I'm seeing some similarities. And does that mean that the Thalmor have a similar goal in mind? I don't know. Maybe kind of in the ultimate objective. But because Leto did some pretty horrible stuff too.
Yeah.
And Sotha, there's a couple points in Clockwork City where I get a little grumpy with Sotha Sil, the Nemisphere, for instance, and the whole thing with the astronomer. But anyway, I digress.
Well, the purpose of Leto II's Golden Path was to create an environment so horribly torturous and cruel that it would create that it would turn the race of men. That it would turn mankind into a species of warriors that surpass even the Fremen as as the greatest warriors in history. The Fremen were considered to be a fighting force of extraordinary magnitude because they had developed their culture and their people in the harshest conditions that anybody in the universe had experienced, according to according to the various cultures that are running the universe at the point of the first book. So again, we're back to the idea of improvement through suffering, and that was sort of the pitch for why the Fremen were able to defeat Sardaukar terror troops and all the and all the guns that the Emperor could point at them, was because they possessed unbelievable martial force, partially due to the fact that a Bene Gesserit ended up teaching them a lot of stuff too. Let's not undersell that. But the Bene Gesserit would say that they were able to teach the Fremen their martial skills because the Fremen had developed themselves in the against the hammer and anvil of Dune, of Arrakis. The Golden Path was supposed to replicate that act. Basically, was to create an entire universe that was so oppressive and awful that the entirety of mankind could reach a state of ability and resilience, so that when the great threat that Leto II couldn't quite see but knew was coming eventually arrived, that mankind would be ready for it. And the only thing that Leto knew for certain was that mankind, when Leto came into power, was not ready for this great threat. And unfortunately, if I recall correctly, one of Leto II's biggest sort of emotional pain was that he didn't exactly know what the nature of that threat was, so he couldn't adequately direct the development of mankind. So instead of, doing something constructive and saying, okay, you guys need to practice this stuff and get really good at, laser-based weapons or something, I don't know, whatever. Instead of being able to be really specific and constructive, he instead had to torture the hell out of humanity as a whole and just make it, and oppress the shit out of it, and in order to make it more powerful. And that was, I think, the complexity of the character in that respect. It's fortunate for the Elder Scrolls universe that Sotha Sil doesn't have the same level of influence that Leto II had, because it's possible that Sotha Sil might take the same approach and just, So, but then Dr. Nightstone just pointed out in chat something interesting. Is it possible that this was Lorcan's motivation? And I don't think that Lorcan saw a great threat like Leto II saw, other than acknowledging the trap of the Arbus. I think Lorcan's goal was to just get people out of the situation they were in, and so that's why Lorcan created Nirn and Mundus. It wasn't so much that a threat was coming; it's that a threat was already here.
It sounds a lot more like Shore's army.
Yeah. Yeah. So there, but then again, I mean, people who are frequent to this channel and the Lorecasts will know, if you, like Johnny Anonymous says, you really need to read Dune. It's a big influence on the Elder Scrolls lore in general, and it's never a waste of time. It's phenomenal writing.
Yeah, it's I'm reading it now for the second or third time, and I got to tell you, man, as time goes on, it just becomes more important to me. It's a fantastic series, but don't read anything by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson.
No, don't get anywhere near that shit. Yeah, I'll put it to you this way: look up the book summaries on Wikipedia, and that might answer some questions you might have. But don't waste your money or your time on those books.
Okay.
Frank's books are
good
magnificent.
Because I need to read Dune.
Say what?
Yep.
I need to read Dune. I still haven't read it yet.
So good.
It's very, very good. The real meat is
Yeah.
in the second, is in the later books, but Dune is, in my opinion, the easiest one to read, and that's saying something because it's a mother. But
800 pages.
So-
It's
Yeah.
really good though.
All right.
Yeah.
Was there anything else we wanted to discuss that was Thalmor related, just to drag us back on topic? I don't know whether we diverged from. I know that Michael was wanting to say something about Gnosticism as such, but I don't know whether we've kind of talked our way around that one from,
Yeah, I think
from the Hinduism stuff.
I think we basically covered it. In extremely short terms, just that I saw that there was a lot of confluence between the Thalmor ideology and Valentinian Gnosticism, which that's something you can look up. But the basic thing is that creation was bad and that you want to escape. And they had different ways of looking at that. But I see that there's a lot of conversation between the Thalmor and the Valentinian Gnostics.
Yeah.
okay, great. So we are, gosh, we're an hour and 50 minutes in, so I think we could probably call it here.
Nice.
Yep.
I want to
Alright,
thank everybody for showing up. I don't think we have a
Glad I
topic
could
for
be
next
here.
week.
It was so good.
Do we have a topic for next week?
We're
we got
doing
a
this
list.
weekly? Oh
No,
my.
not weekly. I think we've been going every 2 weeks or so.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Oh, I'm
this
sorry,
one,
not next week. I meant
This
next.
one was 3 weeks. But
Yeah, but that was because Easter happened.
Because of Easter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were we
Aren't
going
we-
to continue the kind of looking at the various societies and governments and stuff?
Yeah,
side of
one
it?
by one individually. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so
on the next
what's the
cast, we'll
next-
definitely be doing. We'll pick something, and I'll announce it hopefully before we do the cast.
Okay.
And
Well, I was gonna
and
say
I
that the
promise
truth-
on my honor, I will immediately start uploading this to YouTube after this cast is over.
Good man.
All right,
Yeah.
we won't be waiting another 2 friggin' weeks. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you again next time. Bye bye.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.